All right, back in the shed. I've had a lot of people ask me why I've upgraded the brakes on the Skyline. Um, it's obviously very fast as it is now. I've got a 335mm two-piece rotor, fixed rotor on the front with an Alcon Mono 4. Brake power is no drama at all. I can outbrake some of the sports cars, so braking effort's not a thing. It takes a lot of maintenance, but I get a bit of brake knockoff, so pad knockoff. So anything sort of more than half worn on the pads, if I'm a bit violent on the curbs or don't give it a bit of a safety tap over the hill, it sort of takes half a movement on the pedal before the pads will take up on a real big brake, and that can be the difference in a tenth of a second, or pinching a brake because you've then put too much pedal pressure into it and locked the brake up or pinched the tyre. So I just try to get some more consistency in the driving. I'm not the best driver in the world, so given that safety tap everywhere on the track, it's just not second nature to me as yet. You see a lot of pros do it, and I'll still have to with the new package, but it just takes some of that inconsistency and risk out of what I'm doing. The biggest places I notice it is into the bowl. So if I've hit the ripple strip on the outside of 5 and fired down and not given it a bit of a safety tap on the way into the bowl, sort of got to give a bit much pedal movement to really get the car in. And then obviously into 7, the car's all freed up, everything's moved around. So what I mean by brake knockoff is, because we run a OEM upright and bearing, so an OEM hub, you get a bit of flex in that under braking and under load, just because we're putting so much load into the front of that car. I do bearings every year on the front of the car. I do rear bearings every 6 months in that car. So with all that load going through, and then you've got a fixed disc and rotor that flexes as well, all that flex pushes the pads apart, and then as those pads move apart, they sort of sit there until you apply the brakes again to move them back in. You can put knockoff springs in the back of the piston. Some of the Alcons have that. Or the other thing is you get a rotor with a free bobbin arrangement. So basically you have the bolt that holds the rotor to the hat goes through a little slider, and that's allowed to let the rotor move a little bit separate to the hat, separate to the hub, and that'll stop some of that flex, hopefully, that I'm seeing. The other thing is that car, I drive it pretty much every 2 weeks. I drive it every week if I could. So every 3 race meetings I'm doing a set of rotors. Every meeting and a half I'm doing a set of pads. So even though it doesn't need any more stopping power, the stopping power is fine, the maintenance is quite high. So running that car consistently at 60s, I'm chasing 59s. It's a lot of effort. If I only drove that car once every 6 months, once every 3 months, I wouldn't consider changing it at all. Or if I was only doing sprints, we're only doing sort of 3, 4, 5 laps at a time. But because we're doing 10 and 15 lap races, really getting the car working those brakes is the most that we can. So although I'm going to carry a little bit more weight, going a 30mm bigger rotor and a lot bigger caliper, the maintenance is going to be a lot better. So I'll put the GoPro on, build this set of rotors. The right hand side's already built, left hand side, I'll put that together. As you can see, the slide is just like on a brake pad, that slides in the caliper. So I'll put that together and show you through it. So Brakes Direct's have been really good for me. I've sold a few of these kits now, and all the cars we're putting into, they work really great. Like I said, I have the 4-pod on mine currently. So you got your spring or your sliding mechanism that basically just slots in there, and then your bobbin, pretty much your spacer or your pad that slots in, and then your bolt and spring goes through. Tiny bit of blue Loctite on the back side. Should have done that before I put the bolt in. That on the top. And then you hold it in place with a small spanner on one side, it's a hex head. And hand tight first, and then we go around and just nip them all up to torque, and then I'll button them up. So once they're all hand tight, then I'll go around in a star pattern and knock them all up. We'll repeat that for each one, then we'll go through to the starboard. So what I mean by doing it up as a star pattern, I'll go there, 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 basically in a star, so you're not just loading up one side. Because this is a floating, it's not so important to do like that, but anything that's rotating you should always do up in a star pattern. Wheels, drive shafts, you name it, just because it stops, if you're going to get anything on the angle or anything it's not going to do up quite flush, because it's rotating you'll get that whip. So it's just a habit that I've always had. And then I'll just put a bit of paint pen on it so I know which one I've done. They don't need to be talked up too much. I think it's, 11 newtons or really low like that. That's what the good book says. So just go around and just go in a star pattern across the rotor until you've got back to where you started. And this is one of those maintenance things as well. Every time you have your brakes apart, every other race meeting, like I bleed the brake fluid every race. Every time you have it apart, you should be checking these. Some guys wire tie them as well. Back in the day, that used to be the done thing for brakes, but with the bobbin arrangements, they're not that tight. They're not designed to be ultra tight. So with the fixed one, like what I've got in the car now, yeah, different story. But all the work is done by that little slider and that little spacer. That's what takes all the load. These are also a not a castle nut, but they're a captive type nut, so they've got the pinched head on them. Alright. So yeah, as easy as that. Job done. Thanks heaps. Big massive thanks to the guys that help us out. Chris at Shockworks has gone above and beyond with these shocks. So good. Steve at MSE Turbos in New Zealand, that whole set on the car is just an absolute monster. The guys at Hyperdrive for keeping the tune in check. Damien at DC Autos, he is the right hand man. He does so much work on this car, it's not funny. Chris at Culture 24/7 helping me get a bit fitter to last these 15 lap sports sedan races. Shane at Behind the Sport for keeping me grounded, and of course us, Lux Performance, for supplying all the good gear so I can get out in these cars.